Hey, folks, here it is, Friday evening. Welcome to my stream. Hey, Audrey, good to see you. Susie Q and James, nice to have you in here so far. Nigel, how you doing, brother? How are things over there in the British Isles? Good to see you here. Now, tonight, I'm all done with my series on David, and I appreciate all of those of you who came here to hear that out and enjoy that. And I'm so glad you're here tonight. Tonight, we're just going to do some commentary tonight. And I'm going to tell you the topic I've chosen, this whole freedom of speech issue, is something erasing the First Amendment, is something that I haven't really planned out. I didn't sit down and build a plan for tonight's show or take down too many notes. I've got a couple of things I'm referencing, and but I want to talk about it. I want to talk with the chat room about that, mostly because of an incident that was in the news that I posted as an article this morning on hate speech. And two kids in high school, teenagers, burned a gay flag, LGBTQ flag, and now they're considering prosecuting these kids for hate crime. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm not drawn on too many notes or too many people's input as far as what's in the news. I'm going to go just from my shoot from the hip, out my ass, off the top of my head, all of those things. And I want us to talk about it. I want to get your take on all of this in the chat room tonight and have you give me some input. If I could take callers, I would, but I'm not set up to do that here. So let's see. Nigel said, why is it called the First Amendment? It skipped on me. When to amend something means to change it. Nigel, I don't know if you're asking a question not knowing sincerely. The Constitution was written, and it has all the articles of the Constitution, but then they started amending the Constitution to add things that needed more clarity, things that came up later down the line, decades later, sometimes 100 years later. And so the First Amendment, the first one was the right to free speech, and we're going to cover that tonight. And then the Second Amendment was the right to keep and bear arms. And then it goes on and on and on. And so if that helps any, okay, we'll cover that, Nigel, and we'll get into the amendments. The amendments were just there's an amendment process to the Constitution that was established when the Constitution was written 250 years ago, almost 250 years ago. And that amendment process is exceedingly difficult. And the founders made it exceedingly difficult for the purpose of making sure that changes to the Constitution were not willy-nilly, were not spurious, were not just because some group comes along and wants to try to change the Constitution. I'll call it up as we go on a little bit tonight, but changing the Constitution was meant to be an arduous, difficult task. It's a legislative task. Any amendment has to be ratified by the states, by a certain number of states out of the 50. There also has to be a certain percentage of legislators voting in favor of it for it to pass. And then it has to go through another process. It's like the first and secondary process. It's because the Constitution is not to be changed on a whim. It's not to go, say, on an emotional whim or the basis of a shifting wind in society. It has to be something. Now, for instance, there was a constitutional amendment that came up a few years ago from the right side, if you will, the right to the conservative side of America, and I thoroughly disagreed with it, and so did a lot of conservatives like myself. The reason we disagreed with it was just because it was coming out of a segment of the conservative movement did not mean that conservatives believed that the amendment that there should be an amendment or the Constitution should be changed in any way, shape, or form over this. And that was the DOMA Act, the Defense of Marriage. That's where a certain group wanted to have our Constitution in the United States define that marriage was defined as between only a man and a woman. Boom. And that was it. Now, at the time, I wasn't pro activist as far as gay rights or gay marriage or anything like that. But at the time that came out, that really solidified me against that kind of. I said, you cannot amend our Constitution on the basis of the religious rights, the religious right, apostrophe S, the religious rights desire to see a man and a woman singled out as the sole definition of marriage in our country. And so I think that's been antiquated. While I'm not an activist for gay movement, I don't care. If somebody is gay and they're in love with somebody else who's gay and they want to get married, I don't have a problem with it. That's their business. I'm staying out of their personal business. Call that the libertarian side of me. I always say I'm a small c conservative with a libertarian bent, and I'm a constitutionalist in the originalist form, meaning I go to original intent, as clear as it might be. And so it makes me a Jeffersonian liberal, pretty much. Nigel says, let them be. They're not hurting anyone else. Bam! That's it. Susie Q says, JJ wants to say Scotty hello. Well, let him say Scotty hello. Thanks, Susie Q. And the Grand Boys also say hi to all. Jeannie, Audrey, James, Mark, everybody. And by the way, let me just do a little recap now that we're in for a few minutes. Mark, Sinner Saint, good to see you, brother. Topper, nice to see you here. And Susie Q, I said hi earlier. Jennifer Roberts, good to see you. Nigel, of course, my brother from England. And good to see you here. And let's see who else we got who slipped in. Oh, Suze, good to see you. Nice to have you here. And Jeannie, great to see you. Let's see. Audrey, love you, Audrey. So happy you're here. Let's see. Who else is in here? I think that's it. I think we're a little caught up with who's showing their face and their name. Philip, good to see you, Philip. Philip says he doesn't like labels. He says, but I get called a Ron Paul progressive. And I'm not a conservative as of 2002, 2003. Never believed Iraq had WMDs. So they called me a liberal. And Bernie read President Reagan's. Okay. I'll tell you this. I was a Reagan conservative very early on in my adult life. Ronald Reagan was the first president I could vote for at age 19, and I voted for him twice. The second time he ran. And I had a lot of respect for Ronald Reagan. And my now very liberal, very leftist, very progressive older daughters, and I don't say that mockingly or demeaningly. My daughters are very smart people, but that's the path they've chosen. That's where they are. They grew up in my Reagan conservative style house. We would sit at breakfast sometimes, my daughters and I. My oldest twin daughters are 27 now. We would sit at breakfast before school, and I'd play on my big screen computer. I'd play like speeches of Reagan's, or it was more the comedy of Ronald Reagan, his comic moments. And my daughters were exposed to all of that. They knew conservatism, but they got out on their own, and they had experiences in life that told them this is the way they ought to go. Now, we argue politics online, but we rarely bring it up face to face. It's an online thing for us, a social media thing for us. They insult me and yell at me. I don't insult and yell at them, but I will get on their butts sometimes about politics on social media. And but for the most part, that's where it stays for us. And so I respect them, even though I disagree with their points of view. So, but yeah, we grew up in a Reagan household. Oh, sorry. You know what I didn't do? If you hang on a second, I got to adjust a light here. I was wondering if I needed to do that. Hang on. I've got, I don't know if you can hear me out here or not because of my directional directional mic. Um, I've got there. Is that a little better? I've got studio. You know what it is? I have a blue light up there because I wanted to do a kind of theatrical lighting in here for doing radio and stuff. And you can see, if I tip this camera back a little bit, you can see all the way up, and you can see the junk on my wall up there. And by the way, I might as well show you because I'm sitting right here. That's a picture that my daughter Bryn drew for me. That's hand-drawn pencil of Samwise Gamgees and Frodo from Lord of the Rings, from the movies. So that hangs there, and but the purple light is actually blue. It was supposed to be kind of blue, like a blue gel and blue tones in here. Set up some kind of nice theatrical, cool background, cool as in shade. And it ends up because I found out I ordered that blue light because every one that I bought at the hardware store was dim. It would shine, and then it just made the room look kind of white with a light tinge of blue, and you could barely make it out. So I ordered one, and it ends up being like a black light. When I turn off these lights, and that light is the only light in here, everything that's white glows blue. So it looks a little purple back there now. So there you go. There's some technical background junk behind the scenes on Scotty Roberts show. So let me just go back through here. While my jeans took. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Oh, my daughters. Yeah, my daughters are very hard-headed. You know what I taught my daughters? And we're going to get into this free speech thing, but I want to tell you something. One thing I taught my daughters at a very early age, and I remember distinctly telling them this, and this was, I may have mentioned this once before on the Situation Room with Rocky, but I would tell my kids, I would let them watch, I think when they were 10 or 11, my daughters watched Braveheart with me. My daughters would watch Saving Private Ryan with me, movies like that. And that's not the only sources of these things, but I remember taking the learning lesson off of that. And I remember telling them after Braveheart, I said, there's a great lesson to be learned here. I said, even though that movie isn't historically accurate, I said, it's portraying something about this man who fought for what he believed. And I said, don't ever let anybody tell you what to believe. I said, you stand your ground. If you believe in something and you have convictions in your heart about that thing, I said, you stand for it and don't let anybody knock you off your feet. And if they do, you get back up and you give it right back. And I said, so stand for what you believe in. Now, that's haunted me a few times as they get older when we debate politics, my daughters and I. They're very strong. They're very intelligent. This isn't just doting dad shit that I'm spewing on you. This is who they are. And they're bright. They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They're entrepreneurs. They make millions of dollars a year when I don't make a fraction of that. So my daughters have got, as we used to say, their feces coagulated. But they're commenting. I see comments coming up now. They're commenting to me on the post I put up this morning. Right now, as we're speaking, their ears must be tingling. I don't think they listen to my show. They don't want to hear that stuff coming out of me. But so all of this stuff, I took time and taught them lessons about life and how to act. They taught themselves certain things in life. I taught them principles that I believed in. And I wanted them to take, and you know what? They took it with them, and they still do that. Terry Electra, by the way, welcome. Absolutely. My dad, my daughters always were able to tell me what they thought. And I always told them as they were growing up, I said, don't ever be afraid to tell me anything. I said, even if you think you're going to get me pissed off, even if you did something wrong and you're afraid of the consequences, I said, come to me and talk to me. I said, I will treat you. And the older they got, I would tell them this, I will treat you like an adult. I will treat you like somebody I care about, and I will treat you like somebody that deserves respect. And that's what I always did for them. And they were always there for me as I grew older. So, and they still are. So there you go. And I'm going to share. I know we're off topic, but I'm talking about my kids. Hard to stop me. When I was when I had my heart attack and had my open heart surgery, be 2.5 years ago now, believe it or not. And you can still even see there it is. It goes zip. There it is. There she is, folks. Uh, that happened to me. I didn't realize I was having a heart attack, and it dragged on for a few days. Finally went in, and of course, the next day I had open heart surgery. And my daughters flew up from North Carolina where they were living, and they stayed. When I woke up from surgery, my daughters were in my room, and they slept there in my room, and for a week. They took off of work, their own business, and they came up here. And my daughters, they on the second day after my surgery, they started um, a raffle, I guess you'd call it. They make those mermaid tails. That's what they do. And they raffled off one of their really expensive, like $5,000-$6,000 mermaid tails, these custom made artsy things, and out of silicone. And they raffled one of those off, and they sold raffle tickets. And they just said, look, our dad's an artist. If he doesn't work, he doesn't pay his bills. So, donate to this little raffle. We'll raffle off this big tail, this mermaid tail. And they raised, I'm not sure if they're comfortable with me sharing the amount, but if they're not watching, I got to tell you, they raised, let's put it this way, mid 5 figures is what they raised for me in cash. And that went right into our coffers and into our family. And now I will say this, Uncle Sam almost got them in trouble, said, you can't do a raffle, that's gambling. And like took a huge percentage point, like 45% of it went right to Uncle Sam. And then PayPal didn't like the fact that they had all these donations coming in that totaled that much money. PayPal froze it up for 6 months. Things like that, a big portion of it anyway. And so, but this is what my daughters did for me as an adult as they were getting older. So that gives you an idea. It's nice to have your kids. I said, when I was raising my kids, I said, I want to raise my kids so they want me around when they're adults. And I do the same with my little kids. Now they're at a different stage out there. My one boy is Flynn. He's going to be 10 next month. He is starting to get to that age where my young daughters, Abby and Bryn, really started clicking in, and we were doing all this stuff together. And then I got the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old is still queen of the universe, And my 4-year-old, I got to share this with you. My 4-year-old said to me today, I'm sitting here doing work at my desk. My 4-year-old comes in, sweet little cherub voice, pixie voice, and she looks up at me and she's got her bowl, and I had cut up some cantaloupe for her earlier in the day, and she said, Daddy, she said, I want more. And I said, I can get you more. And I said, but you're going to have to wait. I'm right in the middle of doing something for a client. And she got mad, kind of. And I said, no. I said, don't get mad. Just get patient. I said, wait for Dad. And I'll come out and I'll get you some in the next few minutes. And I said, and she harumphed at me again. And I said, you know what? I said, Mom and Dad are not your maids. We're maids and butlers. I said, we don't wait on you hand and foot. I said, just because you come in here to ask doesn't mean I'm going to say, okay, let me drop everything I'm doing and go get you some more cantaloupe. I said, you just wait and be a little patient. And she said, she humped again, and she looked at me and she said, that's why I want slaves. Now, folks, lest anybody panic out there, she wasn't talking pre-Civil War black slavery in America, racist thing. You know where she got that? We were watching the animated version of the Moses story, the DreamWorks, The Prince of Egypt, just the other day. And she saw that they were slaves, and how Moses told the Pharaoh, you can't build a nation on the backs of slaves. And how the Pharaoh's father said, he says, don't worry about their death, son. They were only slaves. And so my daughter picked up the term slave from that. And slave is doing work for somebody. So that's what my little girl did. Anyway, let's get off of that. Now, I rabbit trailed onto that, as I am wont to do, but it's my show, and I like to talk, and you get to hear me. We're 20 minutes in, and we've barely started this. Nigel asked a pretty good question about the amendment process. And here, Nigel, I'm just going to call something up here, amendment process, because I've got to refresh my memory even a little bit here. The amendment process is this. Goes like this. Method 1 is you have to define the amendment, understand the process. Method 2, jump on an existing bandwagon. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Never mind. This is how can it be amended? What's the formal amendment process? Here we go. The formal amendment process to the Constitution of the United States. If you want to add an amendment to the Constitution, you have to start in one of two places. First and most commonly, you start with either the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate. It doesn't matter which one you start with. And I want to see the actual process in front of me here. Hold on. This is in the National Archives. Here you go. Here's how you amend the Constitution. And folks of you that are citizens of the United States, maybe you don't know this. It's good to know when you hear about amendments that are made to the Constitution and amendments people want to make. Those of you who are out of the country, hopefully this is interesting enough for you. The authority to amend the Constitution of the United States is derived from Article 5 of the Constitution. And after Congress proposes an amendment, the Archivist of the United States, who heads the National Archives and Records Administration, that's NARA, is charged with responsibility for administering the ratification process under the provisions of the law, and he names the law by number and name. The archivist has delegated many of the ministerial duties associated with this function to the Director of the Federal Register. Neither Article 5 of the Constitution nor Section 106B describe the ratification process in detail. In the Constitution, it doesn't really describe the whole process in great detail. It's superficial. And the archivist and the Director of the Federal Register have to follow procedures and customs that have been established by the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State's office, who performed these duties until 1950. And the administrator of the General Services, who served in this capacity until NARA assumed responsibility as an independent agency. Now, the Constitution provides that an amendment to the Constitution may be proposed either by the Congress with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. There's like 328 members of the joint House and Senate. There has to be 2/3 of those people, but not just 2/3 of the total. It's 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate. None of the 27 amendments to the Constitution that exist now have been proposed by the Constitutional Convention. The Congress proposes an amendment in the form of a joint resolution. And since the president doesn't have a constitutional role in the amendment process, the joint resolution doesn't go to the White House for signature or approval. He can't veto it. He can't approve it. The original document is forwarded directly to NARA's office of the Federal Register for processing for publication. Now, I want to see if there's any more of this that's pertinent. The archivist submits the proposed amendment to the states. Now, there are 50 independent states. Folks, if you know, and those of you who are not citizens of the United States and live in other countries, when we are called the United States of America, that's a very accurate title because we have a federal government that oversees, if you will, all of the 50 states. But the 50 states are independent states, and the federal government can only mandate certain laws that are constitutionally provided for over the 50 states. But the federal government also cannot mandate state law to the states. So that's why, like with healthcare, a lot of people were against Obamacare or universal health care because they said it is not the federal government's job. It's not under their purview to administer health care to the nation and everybody in it. Federal government has basically a couple of jobs. It's to defend the country. It's when it says provide for the general welfare in the Constitution, that's not welfare as we know it today by that definition. So you have the 50 states have their own independent governments, but we are part of the union of the 50 states, the United States. And so we are one country. Now, the state of Illinois can't go declare war on Russia. They can't do it by themselves. That is under the purview of the federal government. So, but the state of Illinois, if they wanted to, could secede from the Union. This is exactly what you had happen during the Civil War 150 years ago. The southern states seceded from the Union. They didn't want to be part of the United States. They became the Confederate States. It was the Confederacy. And so that's kind of how that works. Now, going on with the constitutional amendment process, the archivist submits the proposed amendment. It's the Office of the Federal Register, the OFR. He examines the ratification documents for facial legal sufficiency and an authenticating signature. They have to submit these to the states. And now a proposed amendment becomes part of the Constitution as soon, here's the important part, Nigel, and everybody else. A proposed amendment becomes part of the Constitution as soon as it is ratified by 3/4 of the states. And now that we're 50 states, it's 38 of the states have to ratify that, approve it, sign off on it before it becomes part of our governing document, the Constitution. And in a few instances, states have sent official documents to NARA to record the rejection of an amendment or the rescission of prior ratification. Now, the archivist doesn't have to make substantial determinations as to the validity of the state ratification actions, but it has been established that the archivist's certification of the facial legal sufficiency of ratification documents is final and conclusive. So they've got one little paragraph here. In recent history, the signing of the certificate has become a ceremonial function attended by various dignitaries, which may include the president. President Johnson signed the certifications for the 24th and 25th Amendments as a witness, and President Nixon similarly witnessed the certification of the 26th Amendment, along with 3 young scholars. In 1992, the archivist performed the duties of certifying official for the first time to recognize the ratification of the 27th Amendment. And the director of the Federal Register signed the certification as a witness. So that whole process is what we have to go through in the United States if we want to ratify or change or amend the Constitution of the United States. Now, I believe the Constitution is a living document. Not in a science fiction way. You know what I mean? Now, that argument has come up with both sides. There are those who say, we want to change the Constitution. It's a living document. It's supposed to grow with you, so you're supposed to change it. I'm an originalist in that I believe the intent of the Constitution was genius by the founders. And the only time you change the Constitution is when it is absolutely necessary to change the Constitution. For instance, women's suffrage in 1919, I believe it was when we ratified the Constitution, amended the Constitution to allow the right for women to vote, which seems like such an odd thing nowadays. But one thing, and now we can segue this into the freedom of speech issue I'm going to be talking about, is that We are a growing nation, an evolving nation. People who are citizens of this country and stand against their country and want to see it changed and want to see the amendments torn up and the Constitution torn up. These are all people who don't understand, in my observation of it, the original intent of the Constitution and the original intent of the founders in framing that Constitution the way they did and building this country. You can call them the founders, the framers. We used to call them the founding fathers. But then, of course, that term is sexist. So we had to get rid of that. Politically incorrect. So the founding fathers, what we grew up with when I was a kid, became the founders. And now they're also the framers. So women don't get offended that they weren't a part of that list. But the point I'm making is this. In those times, the mid 18th century, mid to late 18th century, the 1776, that era, slavery, which has been a thing that has come up many times. Slavery was commonplace in the world. That was the way economies worked. That was the way the economy in the colonies worked, for good or ill. But we remember in 1770s and before, we did not have the sense of what slavery is and prejudice is and segregation is, racism is, the way they did back then. They didn't have what we have now. They didn't have 21st century sensibilities. They had 18th, 17th to 18th century sensibilities. And this is why the framers, the founders, the founding fathers, the dudes who wrote the Constitution eventually came to the understanding that when we say that all men are created equal, men being the euphemistic word for humans, that all humans are created equal, that they were dealing with a huge inconsistency. They said, we cannot allow there to be slavery. Many of your founders, guys like Thomas Jefferson, who penned the part of penning the Declaration of Independence, penned the Constitution, that these are guys who owned slaves. Washington, the first president of this nation, owned slaves. But these were also men Jefferson wrote a few years later. I think it was after he became president. So this is after the Constitution was written, long after. He said, I cannot reconcile myself with forming and framing the country we have and owning slaves. Now, it doesn't matter. There was all the new light in the last 10 or 15 years of Jefferson having fathered children with a slave woman, one of his slaves, but Sally Hemings. But this is also a woman he was in love with. She was freed by him, but she chose to stay there. Same with his slaves. He eventually freed his slaves. But they lived in a society where that was not even as brilliantly radiant as unmentionable. For Jefferson to have fallen in love and had children with one of his black slaves. And by the way, get out of your mind the in rags and chains and living in the shack out back. She could have been, I think, in her own right, a very upstanding lady in society at that time, but it was not allowed. And it was the same with women's suffrage. These were things that we evolved into, and they became things that we did. The framers created a country where there was the atmosphere provided and the animus provided for this country to grow into these concepts. They knew what was out there. The founders were futurists beyond their own time. So that gives you an idea. When I hear people say, well, I can't abide by the Constitution, and I hate the colonial flag because it all stood for slavery, Colin Kaepernick, he can go shove it. Colin Kaepernick doesn't have the mind of somebody who has studied history and understands that things were different back then, and that those people, those men, formed this country so it could be something that evolved. They knew it would have to. Why do you think Jefferson said things like, every now and then the tree of liberty is going to have to be watered by the blood of patriots? He said he expected that there would be a little revolution every 20 years or so. This is the way the founders thought. Jefferson also believed that the Constitution would have to be changed over time. Now, there's been 27 amendments to the Constitution. Thank God not a 28th with the DOMA people, the Defense of Marriage Act. That's ridiculous. Let me catch up on things that you guys are saying here. Hey, Twisted, good to see you. James Sheets, good to have you, brother. Lucky Stone, I want to think that you're Irish. I don't know why, but Lucky Stone. Maybe it's Lucky Charms is what comes to my mind, and so I'm thinking Lucky Stone. Let's see, Delaney, good to have you here. Yeah, I'd like to kick Kaepernick in the head too. I think he needs a good swift kick to the head. Or he needs to be mandated if he's going to be can there be a law that says if you're going to open your mouth about politics or open your mouth about history of our country and so on, that you got to at least take a class about American history? You think? So Ben Franklin, when asked what happened, oh yeah, Ben Franklin is coming out of the Constitutional Congress. And a woman asked him, she said, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he said, we've given you a republic, madam. Now let's see if you can keep it. That's what Mark is referring to. Let's see. Melanie, good to have you here. Let's see. The Civil War had little to do with slavery. I've heard that argument before, and I used to say that too. Really, what the Civil War was about was economics. What war isn't? Unless you're declaring a holy war on somebody, most wars that take place happen because of economics, finances, how you deal with each other on that. Now, of course, you can look back and you can go, Cambyses of Persia in 525 BC launched an all-out invasion of ancient Egypt because there was an insult over his daughter or his wife or somebody being married, and they threw out an insult, and Cambyses went and sacked Egypt, killed the whole royal family, executed them all, and then went out to the oasis at Siwa and lost his army. They all disappeared. They all vanished in a sandstorm. 50,000 of them strong. That's a big mystery of history, by the way. So you've got a war is generally about economics. The Civil War, they seceded from the Union because there were movements to abolish slavery. But that was kind of a side issue. I don't have the history of the Civil War in my head, but I'll tell you what I do know is that the freedom of the slaves was something that had to happen. You had economic issues for it that some stood for, some were against. You had people like, I believe Abraham Lincoln was dead set on freeing slaves. Some of that, however, came up as a way to antagonize the South. But there were economics. It was all about the economics of the South. The South thrived off of slavery. And they felt that if slavery ended, they believed their whole system would fall apart in the South. And they were probably right. So when they seceded from the Union, and I don't have all my facts in front of me on this, I'm just shooting from the hip. I'd have to go look up my history to get the succinct sentences and words correct. But Delaney, I think that's who said this. I believe that slavery was an issue of the Civil War. It became the main issue, but it was all based on the economics that were going on. So there you go. Anyway, let's see. And you can say that there is motivation behind everything that gets done. Lincoln, when he's pushing to have the abolition of slavery put into play, he pushed that vehemently. He was passionate about it. Might there have been other motivations behind that? Perhaps. But you also know the character of Lincoln. If you study Lincoln at all, you look into the character of the man. This was something that he would have believed in, no matter what the dictates of politics were around him. So I believe the Emancipation Proclamation. I believe that was a necessary step, and he knew it was necessary. He also knew, these abolitionists and men like Lincoln knew, that we could not survive as a country if we condoned slavery in any way, shape, or form. He knew it had to be done away with. That doesn't mean there weren't people who disagreed with him, obviously. I mean, he got killed for his beliefs, for what he did to the South. I get that. But Lincoln birthed the federal government? Yeah, he did. So, and he was very brave about what he did. So let me look back at some of your comments here, and I want to go more on this this whole issue of freedom of speech. Let's see. We had teachers don't bastardize history first. Teachers nowadays especially bastardize history. I had a good friend of mine on that very point, whose son came home and was touting all these things about Thomas Edison that he learned in school. And my friend wrote a letter to the teacher, and he says, I think that if you're going to tout Thomas Edison, you should also mention that he was a capitalist, that he engaged in corporate espionage, that he stole ideas. The light bulb wasn't his idea, but he gets all the credit for it. Electricity wasn't his idea. He bought up ideas and he capitalized them, which is fine. That's what a capitalist is. But then you forget guys like Tesla, who he outright stole ideas from Tesla. There's a new movie coming out on that, now that I think about that. Cumberbatch. What's his first name? Cumberbatch. British actor's playing Thomas Edison. And I can't remember the guy who's playing Tesla, but that's coming out. But anyway, it's going to be worth seeing, I think. So my friend protested to the teacher and said, I think you need to teach about Tesla. You need to teach about who Edison really was. And the teacher didn't like that at all. And it went all the way up to the principal, and my friend protested to the principal, and they had quite a fight about it. I don't know what the outcome was. I'm just commenting on the fight. I can't remember what actually happened. Yeah, I got little respect for Edison, too. Although when we were kids in grade school, we thought he was the greatest thing since sliced cheese, until you found out what the man was really about. Yeah, he robbed Tesla, Twisted. You're right. Benedict Cumberbatch. There it is. He's one of your countrymen, Nigel. So let's see. Let me go back a little further. So I'm going backwards in the comments. Jennifer Roberts says, I have to work so hard to counteract history lessons given at my son's school. Nigel, the sooner you can go back to homeschooling, the better. Nigel, are you considering that? Now, I know my wife and I, we've talked about it. My wife has worked to the bone already. I work at home and I help her out at home. It gets nuts around here sometimes with the three little kids, the three little pigs, as I like to call them. But they, whom I love dearly. But I had talked about maybe we need to just get out of housing. Let's buy a big motor coach. Let's sink our money into that and let's go traveling. Let's go for a year, 2 years. Let's get out on the road. Go see things. Go see historic places. Go see our country. Go see Canada, because you can drive up into Canada pretty easily. travel around and teach our kids at home. Put them on online school and let them learn online. There's nothing wrong with that. And take them around and teach them things. I would love to take my kids here in the 5-state area, which is Minnesota. I'm going to do it so it looks right to you as if the map's behind me. Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa. That's how we're configured, the 5-state region here. You start going over into the Dakotas, you're getting into Native American history. So many forts over there that were built in the late 18th, 19th century. You've got all the history around here, the history of the Great Lakes to the north. You get out of the 5-state area and the world's your oyster, and you start looking around, and that's something I want to do. But I would like to take on the teaching of our children. I think that'd be a fantastic thing to do. So stop buying kids cell phones too. I think one of the greatest detriments to learning, to communication, to social interactivity is handheld devices. I can't say more about that. I believe the growth of stupidity of our young people can be directly related to social media and handheld devices. They check out. This is why I believe, and I stated this when Rocky and I talked about this a while back. This is why I think young people today think, oh, let's just change the Constitution. Oh, let's change our country. We're kind of tired of the way it is right now. Just hit refresh and let's start over. Because that's the way they think. It's ingrained into the head. There's nothing that's permanent. There's nothing that you can't hit delete. There's nothing that you can't hit refresh. There's nothing that you can't block if you don't like the content. And it's instantaneous. And that's not the way life works, but that's the way everything they do in life is connected to. So I think that that's an issue. So I would agree with you. So James Sheets, old school, heck yeah, Scotty. Absolutely, says Mark. The Mississippi has to hold, says Jeannie. They don't even go outside anymore. That's right. Do you know how I learned how to, by the way, spell Mississippi? It's real easy. I used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning when I was a little kid, and there were these morning cartoons that would come on before the morning news. This is way pre-cable era, cable television era. We had 4 channels. And the little kids' cartoons, there was some old cartoon that had to be from the late 40s or the 50s. They'd shown like Looney Tunes type of stuff. And there was this one that was Follow the Bouncing Ball to sing songs. So you could learn songs. And they had one about the Mississippi. And it was, just remember, MISSISSIPPI. And then you know what? Not long ago, like a week ago, I was writing down Mississippi for some reason. And that went through my head. It was, I'm trying to think of what it was. Why did I have to spell out Mississippi? It was not an official form, but it was something important for some reason. And I'm writing it out. And I go, MISSISSIPPI. And I learned that like 50 years ago. So that's how I learned it. So sing along with Mitch. Yep, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the actual topic for tonight, about erasing the First Amendment. Some of you are on my Facebook page, and I recognize you by name. Some of you might be there and see things that I don't see. But there was this article. And I looked at this article this morning, and it's 2 teenagers that are being investigated for a video of burning an LGBTQ pride flag, potentially a hate crime. So these 2 high school students in Utah could be in big legal trouble right now after the video of a player, allegedly, video of a player, so they were, I think, football players or something, allegedly burning a rainbow flag while laughing and yelling, "All gays die," surfaced online. And the 2 students have been identified or indefinitely suspended from the Kearns High School football team, according to a Salt Lake City Fox-affiliated TV station. In a Snapchat video that has sparked outrage in the community, a player can be seen burning an LGBTQ pride flag and laughing. The person who initially posted the video is an incoming freshman, thought to be about 15 years old. The other person involved is already a student at the school, and he's in trouble for allegedly reposting the video. Now, there's no place for that in our program at all, and it won't be tolerated, Matt Rickards, the team's head coach, told Fox 13. It's potentially a hate crime, so it sickens me. Let's see, the school district, Granite School District spokesman Ben Horsley said, "We want to make sure every student who walks through our doors feels safe and secure in the environment that they're in. Whether it was done intentionally with a threat in mind or for humor's sake, it's absolutely inappropriate. And we're going to address it in a very serious fashion." Rickards added, "We have one rule in our program, and that is not to embarrass yourself, your family, or your team. That rule was broken, so there's got to be consequences for that." And they're having police look into it to ensure that there's no criminal implications, Horsley said. So looking at the video, whether it was intended as a joke or as a serious and broad threat against LGBTQ individuals, it's still a reprehensible act. We need to condemn hatred and bigotry wherever we see it. And that's what Horsley had said, the school or the spokesman for the school district. Now, this launched the headline, the written headline on social media. 2 students may be charged with hate crimes due to burning an LGBTQ flag. So, Rocky Stucci's offended, by the way. He's so easily offended. He's probably weeping over there. He's got his head in his hands, and he doesn't know exactly what he's offended by, but it gives him an opportunity to cry, the emotional meatball. So, and by the way, everybody, Rocky's in the room, so shut up. Let him cry all he wants. He's probably out killing grasshoppers, Audrey says. If you missed that, Rocky was attacked by grasshoppers while mowing his grass today. And he did the non-Earth first type of thing, and he killed them. So there you go. Yeah, that is a story, Michelle. And now, as I posted that up on my Facebook page, and I asked that question, I just said, burning a pride flag is now a hate crime, but it's okay to burn the flag of the United States of America? Welcome to our times, folks, I said, where freedom of expression is wholly one-sided. That was my comment. And I had all sorts of, supporting comments, people that agreed. And then I have people that, he said, one is aimed at protesting a wrong by government and fueled by injustices. The other is aimed at the LGBT and fueled by hate. Not the same thing at all. And of course, there was a string of comments back and forth between he and I and others. And I said, I've found that most idiots burning a flag of the United States, when pressed to delve deeper and express their political ideology behind it, are generally void of any substantive or factual information. If someone is dumb enough to burn an American flag or an LGBTQ flag, the Constitution defends their freedom of expression. When did the Constitution ever say that you can't express your First Amendment rights out of stupidity? Never. The Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of expression. It does not guarantee that no one will be offended by what you say. It doesn't guarantee that somebody won't beat the shit out of you for what you say. If that were the case, there'd be a hell of a lot of people in jail today for expressing their political ideologies and their opinions. Here's an example I put up this morning. I said, taking an opposite point of view, if you or I were to stand on the street corner on a soapbox and say that we extol the virtues of Nazism and white supremacy here in the United States, you know what? We have every goddamn right to do so. The Constitution guarantees that you have the right to expression. It does not guarantee that people won't think you're an idiot. It does not guarantee that people will not be offended by what you say. it guarantees you the right to speak. And it leaves up to you, the speaker, the necessity to approach your free speech with common sense. So, I continued and I said, that doesn't mean, however, that the Constitution guarantees us that nobody will ever be defended or offended by our stupidity and of the things that we say. And I brought up an old case. I've brought this up before in other topics when it comes to freedom of speech and marching and stuff like that. I remember when I was in high school, I first learned about the case in Skokie, Ohio, the Supreme Court case in 1968, where the American Nazi Party wanted to have a march in Skokie, Ohio in 1968. The problem was they chose a town that was predominantly old and elderly Jewish people. And remember, 1968, you're only talking 23 years after the end of World War II. Many of the people in this town were Holocaust survivors. So what was interesting is that the party wanted to hold a parade in this predominantly Jewish community. The ACLU even stood up to defend the rights of the American Nazis, believe it or not. I'm not big on the ACLU, but they were right in this case. But they stood up to defend Nazis, to say that what they wanted to say was defended or protected by the Constitution, so long as they didn't incite violence. And of course, the old phrase, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. The idea that you have to be responsible about your speech, because if you're irresponsible by that speech, if you incite violence, if you create a problem that creates violence or breaks the law, things like that, you could be held accountable for what you say. So for the record, lest anybody says I'm just an old white guy who's also a racist, or I'm bigoted, or a white supremacist of some sort, I find the American Nazi Party to be abhorrent. They are repulsive. They're repugnant in their ideologies, and I do not support them. But I also believe in the First Amendment rights of the Constitution that says that despite what they have to say, within certain guidelines of not inciting violence and so on, despite what they have to say, they have a right to express what they believe, just as much as I have a right to express it. But nowadays, not only would they be held in contempt for their beliefs, but we'd seek to deny those citizens their First Amendment rights on the basis of what they believe and are calling hate speech or hate speak. So I put up another meme today after all of this discussion came up, and it was by Noam Chomsky. And he said this. He said, if we do not believe in freedom of speech for those we despise, we don't believe in it at all. Or where is it? I got to find this. Captain Kirk himself once said, let's see if I've got it in here. It's got to be here. Was it here or was it in somewhere else? It had to be somewhere else. Oh, there it is. Remember Captain Kirk's famous speech in the old episode of Star Trek, The Omega Glory, the Coms and the Yangs. They found this parallel world that had forgotten the words. And then they pull out these documents that were amazingly identical to the Constitution of the United States and the American flag, that these were their sacred items and they had lost the meaning. They didn't even know how to read the words anymore. And they were using the phrase, remember the phrase, if you're a Star Trek fan, e plebnista? Those were the sacred words. And at the end of the show, through all the conflict and everything that happens, and it's resolving, and Kirk finds the sacred documents, or they're given to him to look at, he picks them up, and at first they want to stop him, and he goes, no. He says, these were meant for everybody. And he picks them up, and he says, you're calling it e plebnista. He says, you're mispronouncing. It's we, the people. And Kirk goes into his very famous Constitution speech. And he says in there, he says, it must stand for everyone or it means nothing. And this is the truth of the First Amendment of the Constitution. It has to stand for the rights of everybody, even the people you despise, even the opinions you hate, even the people who are despicable. You must stand as a citizen of this country for their right to express their freedom of speech. Because you know what? If we deny it to them, one day they'll deny it to us too. Who was the minister during World War II? I think he was a Lutheran minister who, the very famous, which I can't quote off the top of my head, but he said they came for the workers, and I wasn't a worker, so I remained silent. And they came for these people, and I wasn't one of that group, and so I didn't say anything. And then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. He said, but then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. And that famous poem, if you can find that, if anybody can find that, put it into the chat room. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'd like to read that. But yeah, it's an excellent Star Trek episode. Yeah, it brought a tear to my eye and a lump in my throat when I first saw it as a youngster. Yeah, me too. Go figure. So we stand for the rights of those that we disagree with. So the big question is, where did hate speech fit into this? I don't see anything in the Constitution about hate speech. I see that the constitutional, I had somebody, a very good friend of mine who's quite the intellectual. He wrote in that post this morning, he said something like, well, that's right. Remember, the Constitution was written only for non-offensive, common everyday speak, not hate speak. And the point he's making is this: common everyday speech, non-offensive speech, doesn't need any protection. What needs protection is the offensive shit. Because you know what? What happened to the founders? They spoke out in their day, and it was treason, the things that they said. And they said, in this country, you will have the right to speak your mind, say your piece, and have utter freedom to do so within certain bounds. I mean, it was Ben Franklin who said Thomas Jefferson who said liberty too must be limited in order to be possessed. So somebody called me today. He was just railing on me. He was telling me what an ignoramus I was and what a hateful bastard I was, and all the while using all kinds of hateful language and nastiness to tell me how he intolerates the intolerant. He's finally grown intolerant of the intolerant. And that gave him every right to say what he was saying. I always treat people nicely and with respect because I like to let them hang themselves with their own self-made nooses, which he eventually did. Then he told me, get off of my social media thread and leave me alone. What he forgot was that he was on my social media thread making these comments. So he blocked me after that, but his comments are still there. So it's fun to have for posterity. So free speech and the First Amendment is all about protecting offensive speech. Because if you're not being offensive, why would your speech need protection? And if my speech is, if what I'm saying to you right now on this particular radio show, if this speech is protected, then so should the speech be of somebody who ultimately, utterly disagrees with me. That's fine. We don't have to agree with people's speech, but we have to stand for the right to defend it. Because the Constitution, the First Amendment written to the Constitution, or you could say the amendment at that point, was not really changing the wording of the Constitution or the intent of the Constitution. It was adding to. It was an addition, an addendum to this amendment. The very first one they said, they wrote, was freedom of speech. Here's the actual verbiage of the First Amendment. It's very brief if you have not looked it up and read it and refreshed your mind for itself. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Boom. The end of the First Amendment. Now, I thought it was very interesting. I recapped this just tonight. Just before I came on, I was just looking up the exact verbiage of the amendment, and this stood out to me like it hadn't before. It says, in the middle of this, where it's saying the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble. It doesn't say riots. It doesn't say denying people their rights and beating them in the streets. It says the right of the people to peaceably to assemble. That's a big difference than just the right to assemble. They said it has to be peaceably. And people will want to go, what do they mean by peaceably? It's like, shut up. You know what peaceably means. So, I don't agree with Kaepernick either, by the way. If you're talking about him, the founding fathers would be shadow banned from today, says Ron Frisbee. You're absolutely right. Most likely they get kicked off social media platforms like Alex Jones. I think you're absolutely right. Could you imagine the founding fathers arguing their positions on social media today? Especially with, I'm sorry, young people. I was a young people once, but especially young people today, the way they argue online. I got to tell you, and I mentioned this once before, I think, my daughters had put up a post early last week about The Little Mermaid and how Disney is now doing like they're doing with all their other major animated motion pictures. They're creating a live action remake with actors. And they had chosen a young black actress, very talented, beautiful young black actress, to play Ariel in The Little Mermaid. And my daughters were putting up, hey, this is great. This is great news, because my daughters make mermaid tales for a living. And I think, by the way, I think that movie is going to be a boon for their business. And I'm all for it. You go with the flow. That's like when Exodus, Gods and Kings came out from Ridley Scott. That movie, with John and I had just written the Exodus reality. So he said, yeah, Exodus reality. So not the same as a Disney animated book. So anyway, all these friends of theirs that are all, 18 to 27-year-olds, they're all in there just yucking it up and happy about, diversity, finally. And, that's wonderful that it's a black actress. It's wonderful. And I came in and I said, I'm kind of disappointed in the decision. And I said, not from a racial point of view or a skin tone point of view. I said, I don't like the decision to change the character of Ariel. Whether she's a redheaded white girl, they're changing to a black girl, or a black girl, they're changing to a redheaded white girl. I said, I would have a problem with it. I said, because from a creative standpoint, I said, I'm a purist. I like the creative process. They created her to look the way they did for a reason. And I don't think it was racism when they created that character. And I said, and so many kids have grown up with that, and it's become a classic in the Disney animated library. And I said, I just don't think change for the sake of change doesn't thrill me. I said, they're usually, for me, if you're going to make a change that's that major in a character, you should have a reason for it. That is part of the literary reason. Immediately, I was set upon by all their friends as being somebody that was intolerant, against diversity, obviously a racist and a bigot. And I had all these people decrying me. My daughters even yelled at me for it. They didn't come out and call me a racist. They know better. But they also had a friend base, which is also a client base that they have to stand for. I get that. And I had people ask me over and over and over and over and over again, so explain to us why you don't want a person who has darker skin tone to play Ariel. I said, I never said that. I said, I have a problem with the changing of the character, which is different from having a racial problem. Well, that's the only result. It's a racial problem. Black, so you must be a racist. I said, no, I'm a purist. I don't like change to my characters. I said, but, hell, I said, I don't care. I said, when it comes down to it, I said, I'll take my kids to go see it and they're going to love it. And I said, I will bet you it's going to be a phenomenal movie. And of course, nobody would give up the fact that nobody would listen to me say that. So here's the question. I was being told then I was having hate speak because I must hate black people. I said, you know what? I said, to me, this would be like, and everybody kept telling me, well, mermaids are not, they don't have a race. They're fictitious characters, they're fantasy characters. So why can't she be black? I said, she can be. I said, why can't Disney be creative enough to create another character for this wonderful black actress and singer that's going to be her own thing rather than change something that already exists? I said, if it ain't fixed, don't broke it. Or if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And still I'm being called all these things. And my daughters either blocked me from the post or took the post down. I don't know which one it was. But because I didn't see any more after that. The day of admonishment. And so the question of free speech comes in. The question of what is hate speak? Is burning a flag hate speak? I don't know. Is burning the Confederate flag hate speech? Now, there's something interesting. And you will find that people attempting to justify, no matter what side they believe in, they try to justify their position. Because you can't burn the LGBTQ flag. That's hate speak. But you can burn the Confederate flag because everybody knows it's a symbol of hate, according to that side of the equation. To me, they're two flags. I don't care if you fly them or burn them. If you want to burn the American flag, I'm against it personally. But you know what? You have the constitutional right to burn the flag. Go at it. But like I said earlier, Constitution ain't going to guarantee that everybody's going to like what you have to say. And there might be consequences because the Constitution doesn't guarantee you the right to not be set upon, the right to not be disagreed with. The Constitution just guarantees you the right to speak and speak your mind. There's no guarantees beyond that. It's your ball game after you open your mouth. So if it's wrong to burn the LGBTQ flag, if that's a hate crime, is it a hate crime to burn the American flag? And somebody said to me in this post today, well, burning the American flag is against an institution in the country and you disagree and you're in plight over the state of your nation. Blah, 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 blah. Whereas burning the LGBTQ flag, you are resisting people who are downtrodden and have been fighting for their rights. Somebody else said that. And I said, I said, not to be argumentative, but I said, I know a lot of gay people. And I didn't want to use the line like, I have a black son. What was that, Homer Simpson? My black son, my back son. But, and like, what's his name? De Blasio from New York in the Democratic debates. I just want to say that I'm the only man on this stage that can say I have a black son. It's like, oh, man, kiss your ass goodbye. That was the stupidest thing he ever said. But not that most things he says isn't stupid. I don't know how he got into the position he's got as governor. Or is he mayor? Mayor of New York. So taking that back a step, if I can remember where I was, taking that back is that this whole idea that burning a flag of an LGBTQ flag is hate speak, while burning the flag of the United States is not. That's just political statement. Well, what if burning the LGBTQ flag is political statement? Because you're burning the flag, does that mean that you wish ill on everybody? Now, maybe these two boys said stupid stuff along with it. Death to all gays. If it were my kid, I'd have slapped him upside the head for doing that. And I hope his dad did. But how about the Confederate flag? Like I just mentioned, is burning the Confederate flag hate speak? Do people not have the right to fly the Confederate flag if they wish? What if they disagree with slavery too? What if they don't fly it because it was, as some people say, it was a symbol of slavery? It was a symbol of the Southern Confederacy. It was a symbol of the Confederate armies. You got Kaepernick saying that the second stanza of the national anthem was racist, and it was supporting slavery. You've got him saying the Betsy Ross flag was supporting slavery. So, Colin Kaepernick believes it's okay to probably to burn the colonial flag. So what flag is it? Is it hate speak to burn a Nazi flag? There is an American Nazi Party that has the right to exist. And by the way, if I didn't say it, that Skokie, Ohio case back in 1968, where the American Nazi Party was petitioning to march in Skokie, Ohio, in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, you know what the outcome of that was? The United States Supreme Court said they have the right to free speech. They have the right to assemble peaceably. They have a right to march. And that's all they did. They went and they marched through the town. And just dropped my glasses. They went and marched through the town. And you know what? People have a right to not go watch. So it caused a lot of controversy. But the Supreme Court upheld the First Amendment rights of the American Nazi Party to march. They have a right to their free speech, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with them or not, whether you find them detestable or not. I personally find them detestable. I'd rather punch an American Nazi Party member in the face than watch him march with his flag. But you know what? The Constitution guarantees him as a citizen the right to express his free speech. And I heard a history professor of mine in college once, and this made me drop my jaw. Some of you heard me. I mentioned this just recently on one of the shows. I didn't mention what the topic was, but he said, you guys, and this is in the early 1980s when I was in this class. He said, you guys, all of you men and women in the class, he said, you should be willing, and it was all in context. It was a much broader lesson in it wasn't history, it was civics. Much broader lesson he was teaching. He said, he ended it by saying, you as, and remember, this is a Bible college. He said, you as Bible-believing Christians who are also citizens of the United States of America should be willing to lay down your life for the right of somebody who is a member of the Nazi Party here in America, or some other group he mentioned. You should be willing to lay down your life, if it came to that, to stand for their freedom and their constitutional rights. And I said, back then, that was the first I'd heard anything like that. And I said, you know, he's right. If it's good for me, it's good for him. If you're a citizen of this country, you have the right to express yourself freely. You may have to suffer the consequences of people thinking you're a fucking idiot, but that's beside the point. You still have the right. And if you have the right to burn the American flag because you disagree with America and you're a citizen, go ahead and burn that flag. You may have to suffer the consequences of how people will react to you over that. If you are LGBTQ and somebody burns your rainbow flag, so what? They have a right to do that. They have a right to burn the Confederate flag, the Nazi flag. If You can burn the American flag, and there's nothing wrong with it because it's put in the category of political protest. What are all these other things? The kind of protest doesn't, I don't give a flying rat's ass about the kind of protest it is. The kind of protest doesn't matter. It's that you are doing all the same thing. And you know what? These kids should have gotten in trouble for burning the LGBTQ flag. You know why? Because they were probably lighting fire on property they shouldn't have. They posted it on social media. The coach of their team said, we have a rule that our players don't act this way. You know what? They should lose their positions on the team, no matter who they are on the team, because it goes outside the standards of their team rules. But it does not constitute a hate crime. Some of you tell me in here, what do you think a hate crime is? Or maybe do the opposite. Tell me what love crimes are. How many crimes have you heard of that are love crimes? Or I like you crimes? Or gosh, let's be friends crimes? I haven't seen many of those. Hate crime to me, or crimes of violence that involve hatred that involve violence. Crime is crime. And crime isn't committed because you're in love. Well, you might be in love with somebody, but crime isn't committed out of love, out of compassion, out of wanting to do better to your fellow man. Crime is always about hatred of one degree or another. If I go bash out your headlights on your car, that's a property crime. It's a misdemeanor. It's going to cost me money and a fine. If I threaten you with the baseball bat I'm doing with it and smack you upside the head with it, you got a very different kind of crime there. That's a crime of violence. Is it a crime of hate? Maybe. What crime isn't a crime of hate to one degree or another? That's the question I'm looking for. Hate crimes are about reparations, says Jeremy Hansen. I'm putting that together. I want to know how you mean by how hate crimes are crimes of reparation. Hate crimes, I don't know what kind of reparation you're talking about, Jeremy. Clarify that for me in the chat room. I can't just go, yeah, Jeremy, that's absolutely right, because I'm not quite sure the point you're making there. Hate crimes are about reparations. A lot of crime stems from self-hatred. That's very true, Philip. So can you go to jail for self-hatred, self-loathing? Jeremy says hate crimes carry longer sentences amid higher fines. I see what you're saying, Jeremy. You're saying that hate crimes are about the consequence of reparation. Got it. Yeah, I get that part. I get that. It's a hate crime, so we're going to charge you more money and we're going to put you in jail longer. I get it. I get that. I get why they do it. I disagree with that, however. I don't think you should go to jail longer because you hated somebody when you shot them in the head. What if you shot somebody in the head because you were trying to save their life? Well, we've already got a system that's on that. I would dare say you would get a lighter sentence for helping somebody to commit suicide than you would for killing a family in cold blood. You're going to have a very different kind of legal circumstance and consequence for that. Natural law, says Twisted, cause no bodily harm or property harm. There you go. No bodily harm, no property harm. If the kids are, somebody brought up the example of, so wouldn't you call it a hate crime if somebody painted a swastika on a Jewish synagogue? And I said, I wouldn't call it a hate crime. I'd call it an act of hate. Maybe that's semantics. I said, the crime is a crime. They're desecrating somebody's property that doesn't belong to them. They are responsible for that. There are consequences for that. Should they also be prosecuted because instead of a pair of boobs, they painted a swastika? It's a pair of boobs, okay. Or do it this way. An uncircumcised penis versus a swastika painted on the side of a synagogue. Is one of those a hate crime and one isn't? Boobs. Put boobs on a synagogue. Is one a hate crime and one isn't? I don't know. Boom face. Yeah. Yeah. If Rocky were here, he'd be given a face. So, is what Jussie Smollett did a hate crime? Who did he commit a crime against? Himself? No, against society. He committed a crime against the system, against society. He hired people to beat him up. So he could make a point, probably to get a better contract or keep his TV show or something. So many of the vandalism cases end up being hoaxes. That's true. So let's get down to it. What is a hate crime? A hate crime, according to the people who promote hate crime, the labeling of things as hate crime, is a crime where you supposedly are committing the crime because you hate the person upon whom you are committing the crime. And it's a crime of not of passion, it's a crime of hate. But isn't hate an emotion? So couldn't a hate crime be a crime of passion? These are things that are all, as I like to call them, they're gymnastics of the imagination. We have tried to state over the years, since I've been an adult, I've seen it, try to see things stated one way from one political point of view or a political correct point of view, and they keep trying to establish, they keep playing this gymnastic game to try to twist and manipulate, and both sides do it to a certain extent, but to try to twist and manipulate things to make their point work. That's problematic. Playing gymnastics of the mind or of the imagination would be saying that because I bashed your headlights out because of your skin color and I'm a white supremacist, that it's a crime of hate. Well, what if it's a crime of the guy almost ran me over on the street out in front of my house and I went and bashed his headlights out. Then I found out he's black. Oh, yeah, and I'm a white supremacist too. So is that a hate crime? It all depends on intent. It's intent, it's in motivation, and all of that. And I happen to disagree with hate crimes. I really do. Change my mind. If there is something out there that is truly a hate crime, that is motivated only by hate, that hurts only on the basis of hate, and should be punished stronger because it formulated in hate, I'd be willing to change my mind if somebody could convince me that exists. But I think that's the basis of all crimes that are serious crimes anyway. So there you go. That's my take on it, and I'm sticking to it. Antifa commit hate crimes all the time. I've seen people try to justify Antifa's hate crimes by saying, well, they're heroes to a cause because they're standing up against people that are tearing down this nation and blah, 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 ad infinitum. Yes, Philip, Antifa is stupid. Violence means result in violent ends. It's stupid. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But I tell you what, it's not a hate crime. Beating somebody up is a crime of violence, whether you hate or not. And I got to tell you, beating somebody up for what they believe is hateful to begin with. So I'm not for this hate crimes thing. You're getting into subjective area. If somebody beats you up, they should be taken to court for beating you up. When you try to prove it was a hate crime, you're getting into subjective area where that case could probably be proven another way around. If somebody's a fast talker, if they got a good lawyer, they beat up old men and feminine men. That's true. They do. So I don't think Antifa needs to exist in this country. I think that's a group we should stand against. But let me ask you, does somebody who's a member of Antifa have the right to free speech by the First Amendment? Yes, they do. But if they're inciting violence, they've crossed the line of constitutional protection. Okay, I'm going to start repeating things and beating a dead horse on this. So there is my position. If you've got some questions or you want to say your piece here, let's do it now. And let's look back through here because I think we've made the point that there is an erasure of the First Amendment that is going on. That erasure takes the form of political correctness that will not let you speak if they disagree with what you have to say. If you want to maintain your First Amendment rights, you've got to stand for the First Amendment rights of everybody else. It's that simple. I hope we've talked this to death enough that it means something and that there's some substance to this. Delaney said she got a video of it, or he got a video of it. Delaney, who are you? You've told me before, and my old man mind is saying, Delaney, it's got to be a woman. Delaney Jones. So there you go, because I called you she. I hope you're not identifying as something other than he or she, because I wouldn't know what it is. Yep. Okay, I'm right. Phew, I knew it. So, and I can't see your picture really clearly from here. It's about that big. So I got to get really in. I got to put on my glasses. Let me see. Let's see what your picture is. Oh, yeah. You're a Shayla, as they say in certain parts of Australia. So there you go. All right. The FBI gets involved at times, says Philip, and every agency down to the local level. You can look at their websites, the things they shouted in the KKK, neo-Nazi parades. They were out in the open. They didn't hate, or they didn't hide. And I got to tell you, yeah, the LGBT parades, I've seen recent pictures where I wouldn't want my children to see certain segments of those parades because I think they're vile. You don't do that shit in public, guys. If you don't want to be reviled for certain things, or be reviled as an LGBTQ member, part of that community, then don't do stupid shit. And I would say that to anybody. If you don't want to be criticized for being a patriot, don't do stupid patriot shit. Do common sense things. Common sense. Let's see. It's me with my Moses stick and a gavel. Oh, cool. What are your feelings on the cowboy hat politician from Texas who wants people jailed for making fun of politicians? I think that's stupid. How close are we to losing our First Amendment rights? I think if we don't watch it and we aren't careful, it's going to erode away. While we will still maintain and that right will still exist in the Constitution, there's going to be a fight over it. Because we're letting these things are things of gradualism. This stuff started when I was a kid, and it's still going on. So we're talking 45 to 50 years of this stuff building to the point it's at now. I don't think First Amendment rights need to be redefined. They need to be stuck to. They need to be adhered to. There need to be consequences for violating them. I think when big universities, which are a lot of them are funded by the state in part, shouldn't deny the right to conservative speakers to speak, yet open it to liberal speakers. And that's a big issue. That's more than just that black and white of it. But that's a lot of that happened over the last couple of years. And that's where these questions of political correctness superseding constitutional rights started to come into being spoken about. So there you go. Let's see. Yeah, thank you to all our veterans. I appreciate it. Semper Fi to those of you to whom that applies. Let's see. I want to see if there's anything else here. Philip was investigated, found to be authentic. Talking about Antifa. There might be things I missed in here, folks. If I missed them and they're really important, and you want us to talk about it, do it in the next 2 minutes. Restate it in here so I see it. Other than that, I will restate for the record, all crime is hate crime. Everybody, whether you agree with them or not, who is a citizen of this country, has the right to free speech. The Constitution doesn't give them that right. The Constitution recognizes and protects that right for our citizens. And, I just want to say this as we're drawn to a close here tonight. That's the First Amendment. What comes right after the First Amendment? The freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble peaceably, the freedom of the press, the freedom of the right to worship as you choose, the right to not have the state impose that over you. What comes right next? Well, what's right after that? The Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms was considered the next important thing. So there you go. And let's see. If those of you who are here tonight haven't said hi, Michelle, I know I don't think I said hi to you. Kitten, I don't think I said hi to you. Good to have you here. Topper, good to see you. Let's see. And Delaney, I've talked to you. So consider that a hello. Terry Electra. Let's see. Anybody else in here? Susie Q from the very beginning. There's a message held for review. I don't know what it is. Let's see. The consequences. Jeremy, I got to unhide this. Jeremy Hansen said way back, the consequences may be me kicking their ass. There you go. Boom. It's now shown. That's there for posterity forever, Jeremy. And I'm pretty sure you meant it, and you're not backing down from it. Let's see. Delaney asks, what was my feelings on The Wiz with Diana Ross and Michael Jackson? I didn't like it. And, that came out when I was a kid. I wasn't a racist. I'm not now, but I wasn't then either. I didn't have any of this stuff very deeply defined for me when that movie came out. I didn't like it. I thought it was too far off the beaten path for a remake of The Wizard of Oz. However, I read the books like Wicked, which they made the big musical out of. Read the book. Pretty amazing. Gregory, I think is his last name, if I'm not mistaken. But that book was amazing. I read that to my daughters when they were in junior high school, I think was when that came out. So middle school. And we read that book together. And it was called just a Wicked. Wicked was the name of it. Just like the musical. The musical's based off of it. But it went to Oz, and it was this author imagined Oz. It was a reimagining of a fantasy land that L. Frank Baum had created. And he put a lot of meat on the bones and into the politics and the intrigue and all of this stuff. I thought that would have made an amazing motion picture without the music. But they did it with music. So my feelings on Delaney on The Wiz, I didn't like it. I didn't like it at the time. And it wasn't because it was black people. I liked the Jackson 5 back then. My mom listened to Diana Ross and a few years before that, of course, but the Supremes. I had no problem with it. Al Jolson, James said, little before my time, but somebody, I was talking to somebody who's a black person that said they didn't like Neil Diamond because he starred in the movie where he played an Al Jolson type character. I can't remember what the name of it was. It came out in the 70s. And I said, that's kind of a dumb reason not to like him. I said, that wasn't Neil Diamond's point of view necessarily, and that was also, once again, you can go back just 30 to 40 years in this country and find things that we did differently that we do differently now. 50 years ago, calling a secretary sweetheart in the office might have been the beginnings of sexual harassment that they call now, but it was more accepted back. People didn't think about it back then until it became an issue for people. Because we thought differently just 50 years ago, let alone 250 years ago when the Constitution was written. So we do things differently now. We used to allow smoking in the office place. I got to tell you, it was as early as, I don't remember when exactly they got rid of this, and maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but I remember working in offices, I thought in the early 90s, and there was still smoking allowed in the buildings. You could say, I worked, I thought it was for the Minneapolis or the St. Paul Pioneer Press big newspaper up here. And people could smoke at their desks. But they also just at that point started coming out with banning it in office places, having smoking sections in restaurants, and so on. So that was in our times. That was in my adult life. Some of these things happen. Susie, you're a sweetheart. Thank you for saying that. So intellectual honesty is refreshing. Yes, it is. With you too, Jeremy. You have to be. Like Rocky and I always say, we've been saying this for years. We're never smarter than common sense. You've got to apply common sense. That doesn't mean I don't get a little partisan at times, but I always try to meter out my partisanship with my common sense. You got to weigh it against each other. That's the way you have to act. Let's see. Yeah, you were just going to say something about smoking, Michelle. Yeah. These are only examples I'm using to say, look how recently times have changed and thinking has changed on these things. Where they were 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Times have changed. So lots of things have changed over the years. So now, folks, I'm going to start wrapping this now. We've been going for an hour and 40 minutes. I didn't think I would go this long. I thought I'd be on for a half an hour tonight. But like I say, you put a nickel in me and I'll start talking. So speaking of nickels, I don't have a donation button. But you could go over to Streaming Talk Live, Streaming Talk Radio, Rocky Stucci's website, and Ad Hoc, my website, for the business side of things. And click on the Son of a Patriot link, and you will see all the shirts and all the things that I've designed, every design that's on there. Go take a look. Go avail yourself of designs. Help support the research I do and the stuff I do by going and buying a shirt or a mug or something. You can get your Meatball Army stuff there as well. JJ, good night. Nice to have you here, JJ. Give your grandma a little kiss for me. So there you go, Susie Q. And also, you can go to my website, which is linked up on my profile over at streamtalkradio.com. And my website's just my name, scottallenroberts.com. Go see what I do. I'm in advertising. I'm an illustrator. I'm a designer. I'm a creative director. I'm a photographer. I'm a writer. I'm all of those things. Go check it out. And if you need my services for your company or for yourself, just had somebody call me today for a new logo. So call me up sometime. I'm also, just to keep you up to date, I've got books in the works. If you've seen my books, you go to my website, scottallenroberts.com, or just type in Scotty Roberts or Scott Allen Roberts books. You'll see all my stuff. They're all over on Amazon. Most of my books are through New Page Books. But go take a peek. I'm working on a couple of books right now. I am finishing a fictional book for my agent called The 10 Breaths of Ra. And I think I regaled you with some of that earlier on, quite a while back. But it's set in the 1920s in Egypt. Mystery, archaeology, history, supernatural, mummies, zombies, all that kind of cool stuff. And adventure on top of it with two characters. And I'm also putting in a proposal right now to my publisher, New Page Books, I've already put in the proposal. I'm sorry. I'm starting to work on the Book of Enoch that they want me to write. I haven't titled it. It's only got tentative titles so far. But they want me to write a book on the Book of Enoch. So I'm working on that as well. And I got a couple other things in the fire. So that lets you know what I'm up to. Thank you for being here. I will be not on the air Saturday or Sunday unless something big happens. But I'll be back again late Sunday night, early Monday morning. That's midnight out east. And 11 p.m. Sunday night with Rocky Stucci. Unless we change it up and he and the professor. I don't know what's going on. So, but I think I'll probably be on Sunday night, Monday morning, and we'll see you next week. And we'll be back here every night, Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. right here. Do me a favor, like this video on your way out, share my link with people, let them know we're here, and we're going to do more and more of this kind of stuff. Along with, I got some new series coming up too. I'm going to be working up something on Solomon after the David series. I'm going to be reading Tam O'Hare, The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And if you want to see what that's about, here, I'm going to type it into the chat room. You just go to tamohare.com. Now, typo, tamohare.com. And I got to tell you, if you want to pick that book up, right now, my link is not working on that website because there's something screwy with the Amazon link. And I've been riding them for the last week to get that fixed. And it's still not working as of today. So, but you can go look at the stuff over there. So, folks, thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for giving me your time. That means a hell of a lot to me. And thanks for sticking around. And do come back again. And I will see you again late Sunday night. And then Monday here. Have a good weekend. Talk to you soon. And remember, express your right, your rights to free speech, and never be smarter than common sense.